First, I want to welcome Joe Lhota to Spin Class. Joe Lhota is running for the Republican nomination, possibly the Conservative Party nomination, for mayor of New York City as part of our Meet the Future Mayor series. We're going to continue that. And Joe Lhota is also famously a former chairman and CEO of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, also known as the MTA. Joe, welcome to Spin Class.
Michael, great to be on your show.
Okay, let's get right into it. The big news of the week is not so much going on in the Republican primary. It's going on the Democratic side. And I know you're not running against him, but I got to get it out of the way. How do you feel about Anthony Weiner getting into the race at this point?
You know, Anthony, and I've said this publicly before, Anthony and I have been friends for over 20 years now. Quite honestly, I think he's got great ideas sometimes. I know he's got an enormous amount of energy, but he also can be very undisciplined. I think he is a wild card in the Democratic primary, and anything that causes chaos on the Democratic side is a good thing for me.
Okay, precisely. Well, that's a good analysis. So you're coupling your running for office with a little punditry for the Democratic side. So that's great. We like that over here on this show. So, Joe, tell us for a second, how do you think Anthony Weiner approaches this race? And this is my last question about Weiner. And he said this morning, I heard him on an interview on, I believe, the Brian Lehrer show. It's talked about the Democrats need to be the party of ideas. Because if they're not the party of ideas, they're not going to win City Hall. They're not going to win Gracie Mansion again. So do you believe also, you must believe, that the ideas are actually with the Republican candidates in this case?
Quite honestly, no matter where I go, I'm currently in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn. I'm always talking about new ideas, ways to create jobs, ways in which we can make the public school system better. We really have to focus on our public schools. Our kids deserve the finest possible education. I talk about, the city budget. One of the things that never gets really talked about in this race is how the city budget has doubled, literally doubled over the last 11 years while Mike Bloomberg has been mayor. And what's really important to understand is that our taxes have gone up, our fees and our fines. You talk to anybody in small business or a homeowner, what they're paying now, and it's really driving a lot of people out of the city. We've got to focus on ideas to make our government get out of the way and allow our private sector to grow and our private sector to prosper. You asked me a question about, where do I see Anthony going to be in this race? Quite honestly, I think Anthony's going to try to run right down the middle. I think the reason why he waited, everybody's been waiting for the last couple of weeks, is to, when's Anthony going to get in? When's Anthony going to get in? All of the bloggers, Jacob, for example, I heard is going to be on your show later, would always ask, what do you know? When do you think he's going to do it? Ever since Anthony started to get into the race, every one of the other Democrats running have inched more and more to the left. Anthony's going to run right down the middle, and he's going to provide in the Democratic primary. Those Reagan Democrats that still exist in all 5 boroughs are going to be in play because he's going to be a voice of moderation compared to all the left wing ideas that are coming out of all the rest of the candidates.
So possibly the Weiner primary voter is the kind of voter that you're looking to court for the general election.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Size up the Republican primary. You have John Catsimatidis running against you right now, who also has the Liberal Party nomination. We've had him on the show. You also have George McDonald out there. How do you think you're positioned right now with regard to the Republican primary?
I think I'm positioned very, very well in the Republican primary. All of us need more name recognition. I have more name recognition than John and more name recognition than George. But be that as it may, not a day goes by when I'm not in all 5 boroughs talking to the voters, talking to the Republican voters as much as I possibly can. We've had mailings to the Republican voters. We're going to continue to have that going forward. We've used some teleconference calls as well with all of the Republican voters just to get our name recognition out there, but also to talk about ideas. I think it's very, very important. I think we need to have some more Republican debates, Republican-only debates, real debates, not these issue forums, but an opportunity to stand at a podium, have Lhota stand there, Catsimatidis stand there, have McDonald's stand there, and let's go at it. Let's talk about the issues and about what's different about each one of us, because there are differences.
So, Joe, John Catsimatidis talks about the fact that he's got a lot of money, so if he's going to win, he's the only Republican who can possibly win City Hall because it takes a lot of money, a la Mike Bloomberg, and he molds himself in the Mike Bloomberg style. How does Joe Lhota surmount the substantial Democratic enrollment advantage that most prognosticators say, well, Mike Bloomberg can only do it because of the oodles of money that he was able to spend?
Right. This idea that that John is putting out there that he's the only Republican that can win because he has the money. I mean, if you follow through with that logic, Ron Lhota would have been elected mayor in 1989, and we would have a different governor and a different senator in Connecticut and a different governor in California. People who spent fortunes, but came in second place, which John will do, come in second place. The reality, the reality is, this campaign is going to be won on ideas. There are going to be at least two liberal Democrats running and a moderate to conservative Republican, Joe Lhota. Somebody will be on the Democratic line. Somebody we know is Adolfo Carrion, will be on the Independent Party line, and it'll be Joe Lhota. And we're going to be talking about ideas. And here's where the ideas all revolve around. It's not about Democratic philosophy. It's not about Republican philosophy. Who's going to keep us safe? Who's going to educate our children? Who's going to pick up our garbage? And who's going to pick up our snow when it actually happens? Those are the core issues that people focus on when they vote for somebody to be the next leader of New York. I've got the skills to do it. I have the leadership skills to do it and the vision to bring New York, to continue all of the great things that have happened in New York over the last 20 years, to bring it to the next level.
Okay, let's talk policy for a couple seconds. You mentioned, and you were a budget director before you became deputy mayor. Tell us about the pension time bomb. That's something I hear every so often, that New York City is now paying, I think, more at this point for retired workers than they are paying for current workers, or maybe it's a close number at this point.
It's a close number. It's true with the police department. We're actually paying more for retired police officers than we are for the current police force. Look, the pension bomb in the city of New York, there's a real disconnect here because most people don't realize what I'm about to say. It is a violation of state law for the city of New York to bring up pensions when they negotiate the collective bargaining agreements. The mayor does not provide the pensions. The pensions are given by the governor and the state legislature. I cannot tell you how many times I went to Albany lobbying them during the Giuliani administration with all of the sweeteners, the pension sweeteners that were given to all of the various different unionized workers in New York City and all the pensioners in New York City. We warned then what would happen now, and it's quite honestly, it's actually happening. The mayor of New York needs to use his bully pulpit. Tier 6 is not enough. We need to have another tier. We need to make sure that our new employees have what is closer to a private sector pension plan than the pension plans that are for the existing employees. This is a time bomb. It is not as big a time bomb as it is in a state like California or a state like Illinois, where their unfunded liability is substantial. I think the city of New York's unfunded liability is in about the 90% range, which is very, very high in comparison to other governments all around the country. But be that as it may, a significant portion of our budget goes to pay for retiree benefits. And by the way, the one retiree benefit that you haven't brought up is the unfunded liability for health care. New York City employees, when they retire, get free health care for the rest of their life. They don't pay anything for it, and that burden, that's an unfunded liability that is 8 to 10 times the amount of unfunded liability that we have in our pension system. We need to start putting money away for these retiree benefits. They've been given away, they're contractual, and the reality is no one's talking about it, and it, in fact, is the biggest time bomb that's out there in our fiscal situation.
Okay, but you were MTA chairman, and I don't know if you actually negotiated the labor contract while you were there. I think it might have gone into arbitration.
I tried to. We never did get it completed, and it's still not completed.
Okay, because the MTA workers don't contribute to the health care at all. And I think they had
contribute 1.5. They could the The TWU workers contribute 1.5%. Those who are not members of the TWU, management and middle management, contribute about 20%.
Okay, so and city workers, New York City workers, don't contribute anything. So when they retire, they get free health care for the rest of their life.
That is correct.
Okay, so I've imagined that one of the things you might want to do when you get in there is change that that paradigm a little bit.
Well, one of the things I said, and I don't like to negotiate in public,
No, of course not,
with labor-related stuff. But one of the things I did say is that when we get to the bargaining table, payment for an increased amount of payment for healthcare costs are going to be on the table. They were on the table when I was negotiating with the Transit Workers Union. They will be on the table when the City of New York negotiates with the 153 different bargaining units that it needs to negotiate with.
Okay, let's go micro for a second to Jewish issues, if you say, since we try and focus this a little bit on the Jewish community, although we can talk all day about city politics and city policy. There has been a perception out there that you've had a slow start with regard to campaigning in the Jewish community, and I don't know if that's something that's been spread by others, but there have been articles to that effect. So you want to address that for the audience?
Sure. It has been spread by others. I have been focusing. I joined the campaign January 15th or 16th. My focus during that period of time has been fundraising. I've had fundraisers in various different Jewish communities in almost all of the boroughs. My focus really has been making sure that I've got the capital, the actual, cash capital, to be able to prosecute a very serious and vigorous campaign. The expectation on there will be time for the politics, but I will I'm making tremendous relationships, and I've had great relationships from my days when I was deputy mayor with various different community and community leaders, for example, in Borough Park and in Williamsburg, people who I work with both as budget director and deputy mayor, been able to rekindle those relationships. Anybody who says that I'm not making inroads in the Jewish community, they're doing it for their own self-political reasons.
Okay, the city council yesterday passed, I believe it was yesterday, passed a non-binding resolution calling on the state to allow or to mandate that public schools need to allow religious groups to meet and congregate in the schools when the schools are not being used. This actually comes out, that used to happen. Church groups and synagogue groups, religious groups used to use the public schools for worship, and that was actually outlawed, I think, last year by the Bloomberg administration. So the city council has now said the other way. And maybe you could address for a second how you feel about that and how you feel generally about the city and with regard to religious groups and how some have this perception the Bloomberg administration has been hostile to Jewish groups a little bit.
I was outraged when the mayor tried to hide behind the First Amendment and saying it was a separation of church and state issue. I mean, that's the most misguided understanding of the United States Constitution I have ever heard in my life. Religious organizations, any organizations, for-profit, not-for-profit, who want to rent any part of our public schools after hours or on the weekends, so long as it doesn't interfere with the academic requirements of that school, they should be allowed to rent that facility. This idea that you can't have religious services in public schools is the most foreign thing I have ever seen in my life. As you know, I'm not Jewish, but I have, in fact, attended religious services in public schools, both in New York as a young kid when my church was being built. We actually had services on Sunday in a public school. When I lived outside of New York, actually went to services outside at a public school. I don't understand the logic and the thinking behind it, especially when the fact that, the religious organizations or any organizations are willing to pay rent to have that facility, rent that could go help the schools and paying for better education for our children. It's a win-win all the way around. When I'm the next mayor, I will reverse what Mike Bloomberg has done. We won't have to go to the state legislature to have a law.
Excellent. And last question, I want to be mindful of your time. I know you're out in another event out there in Brooklyn. How do you feel with regard to education reform, and I guess I'll be more specific with regard to the question, particularly with regard to the Jewish and Catholic school communities, they're really in need of more government assistance. And I don't mean necessarily direct cash assistance, but that also go along. But things like security guards and nurses and all the things that the city could provide in many cases, but doesn't necessarily provide. And I know there was a bill a while ago with regard to allowing or mandating that school safety officers should also patrol non-public schools as well, which I think to me is a no-brainer.
I agree with you. Senator Marty Golden from Bay Ridge, who I'm going to see in a little while, actually has had a bill put forward to make sure that the NYPD and its school the police officers who are involved, the school security,
school safety officers, yes,
would be available in parochial schools and yeshivas. You know, the security of our children shouldn't be distinguished between where they go to school. We should, as a city, make sure that everybody is properly safe and properly secure. In answer to the broader part of your question, yes, this has been going on in my life. I went to parochial schools in the Bronx when I was a young kid, and I can remember there were issues about the fact that some textbooks that were not religious based could be paid by the state, bus services, nursing services, all of which have been cut back significantly. You know, making sure that there's proper health treatment. That's not an issue that should make a distinction between a private school and a public school. It's a responsibility of the state to make sure that children are inoculated, that they have the proper health regimens, that they have the proper textbooks. There's got to be a better way of understanding that it's the responsibility of the state to make sure that our children are properly educated. I will fight to make sure that we get the ability to work not only with the public schools, but also the private schools, the parochial schools, the religious schools, because I think it's very, very important. They're an important component to the education process and always have been in the city of New York.
Okay, Joe Lhota, Republican candidate for mayor. Thank you for joining us on Spin Class as part of our Meet the Future Mayor series.